and Matthews. Pick up our coverage right now.
Our country doesn't win anymore. We're going to start winning again.
If you work in America, you ought to be able to get ahead in America.
I'm not a politician. My only special interest is you.
I will never, ever quit on you.
We will make America great again.
America's best days are still ahead of us.
Today is our Independence Day.
Let's make history together.
Get out and vote.
Let's get out and vote.
It has arrived, election night 2016, and good evening to you from Democracy Plaza here at Rockefeller Center, home ice advantage, our election headquarters for this history-making night as voters choose the 45th President of the United States, a choice which has divided so much of this country beyond just lines of blue and red, but further divisions of race and gender and education in ways we've never seen before, in ways we will talk about here this evening. In less than an hour now, the first poll closings of this night. Just minutes from now, we'll start to get the first actual results from Indiana and Kentucky. Already today, we have seen both candidates cast their ballots. Hillary Clinton in Chappaqua, New York this morning, alongside her husband, the former president. Donald Trump with his wife and his daughter Ivanka voting in Manhattan. Good evening all. Brian Williams, Rachel Maddow, Chris Matthews, our entire family, our entire election night team. And as they say, either way, history is going to be made tonight.
I hope it's tonight. History is going to be made.
How are you defining
during
tonight?
this election? Listen, Barack Obama will become a lame duck president as of tomorrow, we think tomorrow. And I think 8 years ago when he was first elected, all of the smart money in the world would have said that the next Democratic nominee for president after Barack Obama, whether it was in 4 years or 8 years, would be Hillary Clinton. And in fact, she got the nomination. She was favored to get the nomination from the beginning, and she did. Nobody could say anything like that, though, for the Republican side. And what we ended up with is potentially the first woman president of the United States running against somebody who is as much of a historic anomaly as that, for totally different reasons. Somebody with no record of public service, somebody who is the first ever TV celebrity to run for president. And what that means is that we haven't had a normal red-blue election, and we don't really know what the map is going to look like tonight. And they have shaken up a lot of the ideas about the way we thought we were divided between Democrats and Republicans. We'll see how this goes tonight, but these two characters, these two candidates are so larger than life, they're so unique, they're so unlike anything that has ever happened before in politics, that we are in totally new ground. And I think anybody who's confidently predicting the next things that are about to happen will probably be made a fool of tonight.
A terrific caution, and millions of people are still voting. People are voting in droves. More on that in a bit. We are all here by definition because we're romantics about this process. That romance has been trampled. It's been disheveled over the past few months. No one is more of a romantic about this process, about democracy, and this day every 4 years than our friend Chris Matthews. And Chris, what's on your mind
Well,
tonight?
Brian, you got that right. And I think there's going to be huge, I will make one prediction, Rach, that there's going to be huge news tonight.
Yeah.
We either have the first woman in the history of the presidency, which is interesting because if you're a girl now or a young woman, like my daughter who's at Stanford Business, she doesn't like me admitting that because sort of outs her as my daughter. But the fact is, the fact is, this is history. The Pope the other day said we won't have women priests as far as we can imagine. Well, for young girls, that means something if you're a Roman Catholic. But if you're an American, this means now you can be president. And I think that's going to be one of those primordial existential changes in what it means to be a woman in America. I know my guy's saying this, but most voters tonight are women. Secondly, if you have what may be considered an upset tonight and Donald Trump wins, the most explosive anti-establishment vote maybe in modern history we'll ever see. So I think we're going to make history. By the way, the stock market yesterday always tells us what's going on, and even Bernie Sanders and people on the left know that. Yesterday, the stock market had a tremendous rebound because the director of the FBI is not going to further investigate Hillary Clinton, which is good news on world markets. And I think we saw a total increase of 400 points in the Dow in the last 2 days. I think we're going to see tomorrow something more like that. So news either way. Clinton, huge international news, bad news for the world economy. Hillary wins tonight, big news for women and for the the greatness of this country, I think.
You know, Chris, on that stock market point, in the interim 9 days between when Comey sent his first letter and when he said he's clearing her letter, the stock market was down every single one of those 9 days. It was the longest sustained period of the market being down in more than 30 years.
And who likes that?
Well, I mean, it tells you something about how the markets feel about this election. It really, really does. You're right.
Veteran viewers know there are such things called exit polls, and all the networks go in as a consortium, and we also independently crunch all the incoming data. But a point must be made at the top of this evening. No matter what you're seeing on a computer or your device, there's no insider fact or answer tonight. We're going into this as election night coverage. What we can talk about is who is voting, voter attitudes, and the like. Steve Kornacki is going to be one of the busiest men in New York City tonight. He's at the big board with a look at what we do know so far.
Yeah, well, I can talk about here four key groups in this electorate who we have been talking about for months, really for more than a year now in this campaign, how they have responded very differently to this campaign and what the exit polls telling us. Let me take you through them. Let me start with white voters with college degrees. We have talked so much about this group. Generally here, you'd have to say this is sort of suburbanites, white suburbanites you're talking about here. The significance, this is a group that has never voted Democratic in a presidential race. There was a lot of talk and there were a lot of polls running up to this election tonight that said Hillary Clinton would. Well, our first look at the exit poll, you see here Trump clinging to a 1-point lead with white voters with a degree. To put this in some perspective, 4 years ago tonight, we were looking at a margin of 14 points for the Republican. That margin, 14 4 years ago, down to 1 tonight. So we expected movement in this direction. A lot of people expected this is a group Clinton might win. We're seeing her get about as close as you can to winning it, but so far Trump clinging to a 1-point advantage there. Let me show you the flip side of this now, though. These are white voters without a college degree. Generally talking here more about blue-collar white voters, something the Trump campaign's been keying on. And what do you see? You see a margin here of 36 points for Donald Trump. Put this in perspective, 4 years ago, the margin for Mitt Romney, he also won this group, it was 26 points. So you're seeing the opposite reaction here. White voters with a college degree have moved by double digits towards the Democrats. White voters without a college degree, who were already core to the Republican coalition, have moved by double digits further toward Trump, toward the Republicans. A 36-point margin there. And you can break this down and see a gender gap that explains this. Among white women with a college degree, you see Hillary Clinton winning tonight by 8 points. 4 years ago, this same group of voters went for Romney by 6. So you see a swing there. Other side of it, white men, no college degree, blue-collar white men. Look at this. A 47-point margin here for Donald Trump. 4 years ago, this same group for the Republicans, 31 points. So from 31 4 years ago to 47 tonight. That is the story with those two groups. Two other groups we're looking at quickly here, Black voters, again, 4 years ago, what did you see? Barack Obama, first black president, running for re-election. He won this group 93-6. He won it 95-4 in 2008. Tonight, we're seeing 87-8. That is more closely in line with the last Democratic candidate who wasn't Barack Obama. That was in 2004. John Kerry won black voters 88-11. You see Kerry's 88, Clinton's 87 tonight. Slight slippage there for Hillary Clinton with black voters. And how about this? We have talked all campaign about Latino voters. A lot of suspense about what this number was going to be. What we are seeing, Clinton 65, Trump 27. This may surprise some people. 4 years ago, the margin for Barack Obama with Latino voters was 71-27, a 44-point margin. We're seeing 65-27 here. Remember, there are some third-party candidates in the race. Now, again, Republicans 4 years ago, Republican National Committee at least, looked at this number. They said that can never happen again. There's a lot of talk Trump would do worse than the 27. So a bit of a surprise. He's at 27. I will caution you, though, if there's one number I'm showing you right now that's subject to change as the night progresses, it may be this one. Why is that? It's because there's a large Latino population centered on the West Coast. The West Coast data can take a little longer to come in. That could affect the results a little bit. But again, right now we're seeing 65-27 Clinton with Latino voters.
All right, Steve Kornacki at the board, and that's a great caution. Exit data comes in waves. It gets better as the night goes on, and of course we get to fill in with actual results. So all of this will have a better idea, especially concerning these certain populations as the evening goes on. We should introduce the rest of our family here at the table. That would include Nicole Wallace, former communications director in the Bush 43 White House and a veteran of the McCain campaign, among other things. And a Pulitzer Prize winner, Eugene Robinson, rejoins us tonight. Welcome to you both. Nicole, I was thinking about your former bosses, the Bush family, and all of your friends throughout establishment Republican land tonight.
Yes, we've been at a 15-month wake for the party formerly known as the Republican Party. You know, George W. Bush making a little bit of news tonight. There was a false story saying that he had voted for Hillary Clinton. I'm assured that that is not the case. But you know, these numbers to me...
But he didn't vote for
Donald Trump either.
He voted nobody for president.
Right. He has made his ideology, this idea of neutrality, he stayed out of President Obama's way for 8 years in a manner that Democrats and Republicans have been proud of, and he wanted to stay out of the way of this presidential campaign. He went out and campaigned for Senate Republicans. I'm going to watch all of those races tonight, but he campaigned on his values, which were against isolationism, against nativism, and against protectionism. So I think his views are public. They're well known, and they're laid bare in his legacy. But he didn't put his finger on the scale in this presidential contest. I'm told they voted down ballot. But you look at the early exit data, and it's clear why the Trump campaign still has some optimism. I mean, Republicans are the ones who have railed against and called cynical campaigns rooted in class warfare. What we see raging in our country is a class war.
Well, what's interesting to see the two numbers moving at once, though, among white voters, right? That you've got Hillary Clinton doing significantly worse than Barack Obama did with non-college educated whites, but significantly better than he did with college educated whites. To get that close, I mean, a Democrat has never, ever, ever won college educated whites. To see her within 1 point there, that's remarkable. It's the question, really, of raw numbers, then, in terms of who turns out.
Well, and also, look, Donald Trump clearly appealed to voters who felt left out by the mega trends that are happening in our society, right? You know, the technological advancement, globalization, you know, those white blue-collar workers who look back to a time when they feel they had it a lot better, and they don't have it that way anymore. And that's really the core of Trump's support. Also, when you look in the data, it seems to me that the Trump campaign was counting on not so much segments of the minority vote, but they were counting on the minority vote to go down in numbers overall, to be smaller percentages of the overall vote. And I don't see that in this data. I see the percentage, you know, in terms of African Americans and Hispanics as percentages of the overall vote. I see that as holding steady from 2012, and potentially as we get more numbers in from the West, I have a feeling the Hispanic segment will increase.
And can I say something? I mean, he started calling this group of voters the forgotten man and the forgotten woman, and it was a closing argument. And the conversations I had tonight with Trump advisors were almost, they've almost leaped forward to, if he comes up short, what if he'd sort of landed on what was a pretty strong closing message sooner? What if he'd gotten himself through the Access Hollywood tape more smoothly? What if he'd simply apologized to the Khan family shortly after, instead of waging a month-long war against the gold standard? I mean, and listen, we don't know the results, but they are already talking about this closing message that talks about what they've started calling the forgotten man and woman. What if they'd landed on that?
The fact that they're talking with you about what if, though, gives you a sense of how they think this is going to go tonight.
Well, there's a good possibility. What often happens in a campaign is one side wins and the other side's argument wins. And it happened in the Cold War, where Kennedy lost the argument to Nixon. He became a hawk. And in this race, if the working white guy, Chuck Schumer the other day said, I'll take a trade. Give me the 2 college-educated women for 1 non-college white guy. Well, that may be right arithmetically, but in terms of the culture of the Democratic Party, I'm not sure that's a great win. It becomes more of an elitist party.
I'm glad you mentioned politics on the ground. Let's go to Chris Matthews' hometown. Jacob Soboroff has been driving around Philly. You're up in Northwest today, which there's Philly and there's Philly, so where are you?
This is the Northern Liberties neighborhood, Brian, of Philadelphia. Last night we heard Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, President of the United States of America come here and implore everyone possible to get out and vote on the only day possible to vote in Pennsylvania, the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Take a look at this. There are 4 voting machines in here. This is the line that stretches all the way down this block. I don't even know if you can see that far, but that is not the only line in this area. Come with me. It also stretches all the way down this block as well. And what I'm told is, how long you guys been waiting here?
About an hour, 15 minutes.
15?
Yep, an
hour 15 minutes on this line. Let's go all the way down. I ran into Senator Bob Casey just earlier tonight here, and he said, which backs up what I've heard from people inside this polling place, that at this location it is record turnout. I've also been speaking to people across town in West Philadelphia. A poll worker, as a matter of fact, he told me they're seeing similar turnout numbers all the way on the other side of town as well. How long you guys been here?
Too long.
Too long. All right, but you know what? For democracy, there is no too long. And despite rumors, innuendo about a rigged election, we're even here in the Republican Party tonight say that there were cases of voter fraud in this town. Everything is going smoothly as far as we can see, and we'll continue to monitor it all night long from here in Philadelphia. Brian, Rachel, back to you.
Jacob, thank you very much. Chris, you know that street corner.
Yeah, it used to be a fish town. It used to be poor whites, and now it's the overload from Brooklyn.
Yeah,
this is where young millennials go to get jobs. I guess it's meds and eds. I keep wondering where they're getting jobs in Philly. It's education and it's the medical industry, the big hospitals in Philly. But you hold those young millennial people, somewhat diverse, not much of a diverse crowd, young millennials.
But Fishtown was the kiss of death years ago. If you said to someone you were from Fishtown,
well, it was white angry people.
They would make fun of you like being from the Pine Barrens of New Jersey.
And the great irony, I will say this later, but for Hispanic voters, Latino voters, they now have a name for their pain. Donald Trump. And back when you were covering Philadelphia, and before that, Frank Rizzo was the name for an African American. We hate Frank Rizzo because he hates us. Yeah. And we're going to, the guy with the nightstick in his cummerbund. And they out-registered the whites. So what we're seeing is a phenomenon where a minority group that feels it's under attack gets robust, it shows up, it votes, and it sticks it to the guy, bluntly, who went after them. So if you want to rouse up a minority group, attack them.
That
is one way to do it.
And that is the single best reason, no matter what happens in the states that we get in at the top of this hour, the single best reason to watch these results until the end tonight, because when we see the Latino numbers come in from the West Coast, that's going to tell you what's going to happen in American politics next.
And guess whose name ID, Rachel, is 100%?
Yeah.
Donald Trump's. 100%.
Exactly right.
We're going to fit in a break, 3 minutes until we get first real vote. It's complicated, but it's coming in nonetheless, and pretty soon we're going to know a lot of it. Stay with us.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
We're back, and we'll take it. Here's some real numbers. They are not predictive, nor do they really mean anything, except we have that number of votes in. Kentucky is a split poll state, so we get partial Kentucky returns, and we wait until the next hour when everyone's closed up before obviously making any kinds of projections. This only shows that among the first folks to vote, it's coming out 73 to 25. Trump over Hillary Clinton, but it's numbers.
Yeah, that upper right-hand corner there is the most important 1%. Number on that screen, 1%. And we will get some partial results, some partial closings, also out of Indiana, I believe.
Yeah, we're waiting for Indiana.
Before we get that full rash of closings, including some big high-profile states, which will be closing at the top of this hour at 7 o'clock Eastern. One of the states we are looking ahead to tonight with a lot of interest. One, because it's not always seen as a toss-up state. It's not always seen as a swing state. Two, because both candidates lavished attention on it in the very closing days of the campaign, including Donald Trump doing his very last rally there last night after midnight. And three, because there's almost no early vote there, so we really know what's going to happen. That key state, unexpectedly, is Michigan. tonight. We've asked Steve Kornacki to give us a little bit of a preview in terms of the state of Michigan, including why it is so hard fought there this year. Steve.
Yeah, Rachel, well, we're seeing the explanation in those numbers I showed you a minute ago from the exit poll. So let's take a look at 2012, what happened in Michigan. Look, this wasn't a battleground state. This was almost a 10-point win for Barack Obama. So why is Trump there? Why was the Clinton campaign getting nervous? What are we going to look for tonight? Has everything to do with those deep divisions, especially among white voters, those new divisions I just told you about. Take a look here. There's two counties in particular I want you to focus in on. They are both right outside Detroit. One is right here. This is Macomb County. Macomb County is famous in American politics because of the term Reagan Democrats. It started in this county. Conservative white voters, socially conservative, blue-collar white voters who went for Ronald Reagan in the 80s. Well, they came back to the Democrats. They voted for Obama 4 years ago, but these are white voters without a college degree. We talk about them in the polls. This is sort of the heart of them in Michigan. And this was an Obama county 4 years ago. There are indications Trump could win this, at least in the polling tonight, that Trump could win this county and win it big. And you're seeing in that national exit poll why. If he's making that kind of a gain with blue-collar white voters. Go right next door, though. Look at this. Another giant suburban county. Look, this was an 8-point win for Obama 4 years ago. Oakland County. Now, this is sort of the opposite of Macomb as suburban counties go. This is an economically upscale suburban county. Those white voters with a college degree. We just showed you nationally they are moving away from the Republicans to the Democrats. So this is where the Democrats are hoping to stave off Trump in Michigan. Anything they lose in Macomb, they want to make up in Oakland. So that tale of contrast between white voters with a degree, white voters without a degree, there's nowhere better in America to see that than these two giant counties right next door to each other in Michigan. It's the reason Trump started going to Michigan, and it's the reason Clinton is hoping to hold them off there.
The oven mitt of Michigan. Keep that graphic handy. We're going to need it all night long, something tells me. Lawrence O'Donnell is in a studio just next to ours where we have housed our political insiders. Lawrence?
We've got a couple guys who know something here, Brian. We've got Steve Schmidt and James Carville. You've been with the candidate at this time, election night. What is it like, James, and does the campaign have access to any better information than the networks do on exit polling?
You know, they have the Clinton campaign has analytics, and they're very, very talented, and they're very good, and they're constantly getting updated. They told me that at 2 o'clock today, the South Florida vote was 98% of what it was in 2012. But a lot of this information is difficult to process. I suspect around the candidate it's awfully quiet right now. I mean, people, you're just careful as to what you say. You don't want to bring any bad news, and you know, somebody will walk in and hand someone something, and they'll hand a note. And at least my experience on election night is it's very nerve-wracking right now, and we're just filling up airtime.
Painfully nerve-wracking. Everybody is exhausted. And people who do this for a living are unusually superstitious. So nobody wants to be the first to deliver good news. No one wants to be the first to utter bad news. And so it's very quiet. It's very, very tense right now. Maybe some joking around a little bit on the side, trying to lighten the moment. But these are tense hours.
James, what are you going to be looking for tonight?
Well, I think it's rough. A third of the country is non-white. A third of the country are high school non-college whites, and a third of the country are college whites. I think that the non-whites and the less than college whites are going toe-to-toe, and they'll sell you out. This is an election, I think, that is going to be decided by, I think the key demographic here are college whites. I think they're going to be the arbiters in this fight between the non-whites and the non-college whites. That's kind of what I think.
Steve, quickly, what are you looking for?
Well, I'm looking to see Florida returns. I'm looking to see North Carolina. I'm looking to see how quickly a path potentially shuts down for Trump to be able to get to 270. And then ultimately looking at the Hispanic turnout in this election, which I think a tidal wave is about to land on the Republican Party that's been coming for some time.
Brian, back to you.
All right, Lawrence and our insiders, interesting conversation. Everyone has their own theory as to what's going to make the difference.
Well, and everybody divides up the country their own way in terms of thinking about who's the relevant jurisdiction here, right? Who's the relevant demographic that we have to be watching here. It does feel a little bit weird. It feels like we're sort of like choosing like clothes or tiles or something to be like, ooh, the non-college white there means that. I mean, it's weird to talk about the country in this way as if you can predict everybody's views. And if you can predict everybody's views based on these rough, gross demographic characteristics.
Labels you would no sooner toss on people as you walk down the street.
And that we don't apply to people in our own lives at all.
Of course.
But it is the way that
it
is the way that we divide the world when we talk about these exits.
In my past, I worked in politics, and I must say that there's something about the whole ritual. Like, concession speeches, which I love. I've said that before, and crying when you lose. These are very important rituals. Going to dinner at this time. What you do is you go to Tip used to do this. My first guy I worked with in '72, Wayne Owens did this. Jack Kennedy did. There was Ben Bradley, his buddy. They went up to see a porn movie.
What?
Oh, yeah, during the West Virginia primary. They didn't want to be anywhere near news.
They went to like a porn theater?
Well, they tried to go to a nice one, and that was closed. They couldn't get in, so they went to the other one.
Your nicer ones.
So the thing is, you try to desperately do what we're doing in a different way. Hide from the news. You don't want anybody coming in with 1% in, because that just drives you crazy. So Tip went off to dinner. He comes back and said, "We lose the house. What happened? What happened?" And they all hide. And right now they're eating somewhere, Japanese restaurant. I remember one of those. You go away from because they don't want to be here while we're doing this.
Nicole, was that your experience?
Well, so in '04, the first wave exit data, which is what I'm sure we're beyond that now, but that was the first information we got in '04, before the days when Air Force One was totally wired with Wi-Fi and whatnot. So we landed in '04 back in Washington, and the first wave data with Bush, and the first wave data had him losing, and John Kerry believed that he would be the next president, and George W. Bush believed he'd lost, and he walked up and down Air Force One, thanking everybody, for leaving it all on the field. And I cried when he thanked me, and I was so distraught. And then they thought it was funny that I cried, so they came back 2 more times. They made me cry 3 times, before we got in bed. That's nice. But we really thought we had lost. And I remember saying, what are you going to do? They took the helicopter back, and the whole family was with him. So we were all in the saddest van ride back to the White House that I've ever been in. And Karen Hughes was in the van, and everyone was really quiet. And, of course, the
next
third,
wave
fourth, and fifth. No, it was really late. And we had a whole press corps out at campaign headquarters, and there was a White House press corps at the White House, but John Kerry didn't concede until the next day. I mean, the data can be really wrong. I mean, I know hope springs eternal, that we'll know tonight, but you really do have to wait for waves and waves of it to come through, in part because of what you're talking about. These demographic groups are not always, they don't always vote as a monolith, and so you really do have to see how the states come in.
And I will say, this year, one of the things that is happening in the media about this election is that a lot of that data, that real-time data, that usually only the campaigns see or that people in the news business see, a lot of that is being made public all day long. That stuff is notoriously wrong. Do not hang your hat on that, no matter how many times you've hit refresh in your browser.
Or it's right for a minute.
Exactly.
But
Bob Shrum was telling John Kerry, the senator, he was calling him Mr. President.
They all were.
You were miserable.
They were dividing up the cabinet seats.
Yes.
Yeah.
All I know is when I DVR a Giants game and they lose, it's terrible. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we will be joined by the Trump campaign manager live. Let's talk briefly about the early vote here, which has really changed the nature of election night, especially this year. This is live voting in Las Vegas, Nevada. Those people who did not vote early are voting on the day of the election. We want to check in as well with both of our correspondents covering both campaigns. Let's begin with Kristen Welker covering the traveling Clinton campaign. Kristen?
Brian, good evening. Clinton campaign officials tell me they are feeling measured confidence heading into this evening. They're touting what they call a tremendous ground organization and the fact that Secretary Clinton ended this race in the way that she wanted to, on a positive note. Despite all of the ugly rhetoric, the controversy surrounding her emails, in these final 48 hours, she was able to focus on telling the voters how she would unify the country if she is, in fact, elected. The states that they are watching closely tonight, Brian, Michigan, that state that you all have been talking about, it is reliably blue. Donald Trump has been making a real play for that state, and one Clinton official telling me because there's no real early voting there, they just don't know how it's going to turn out. Of course, North Carolina, also a state they're focused on because African-American turnout in early voting wasn't as robust as they had hoped. Secretary Clinton preparing 2 speeches tonight, but the campaign saying she is really focused on what she hopes will be a victory speech here at the Javits Center, which has a glass ceiling, and that is symbolism that I think is lost on no one. Brian.
Kristen, thank you. Kristen Welker from the very dressed up Jacob Javits Convention Center in New York. Let's go across town, and both celebrations, both gatherings are going to be in New York City, just as both candidates are from New York. The Hilton Hotel, not far at all from this building, will house the Trump celebration tonight. Peter Alexander. Peter, what have you gathered?
Brian, the ballroom is all dressed up for Donald Trump's arrival here just a couple of hours from now. I was speaking a few minutes ago to a top source close to Donald Trump who is touting what he describes as epic turnout in some critical white Republican counties, specifically focusing on states like Michigan and New Hampshire. The point they are making right now is that they are overperforming how well they were doing in those counties at this point 4 years ago, and they say, and there's so many people in those white Republican counties who have yet to come home. They are also pointing out the fact that lower than normal African-American turnout in places like Michigan and North Carolina will benefit them. The source says to me, Barack Obama's coalition is simply not behind Hillary Clinton. To give you a sense of how they are brimming with confidence right now, this source, again, very close to Donald Trump, is guaranteeing wins in states like Ohio, Iowa, the 2nd District of Maine, North Carolina, and New Hampshire. Brian?
All right, we'll hold them to that. That's an interesting list of guarantees. Peter Alexander at the New York Hilton. Chris Matthews standing by with a special live guest.
We've got Kellyanne Conway, the manager for the Trump campaign. Kellyanne, thank you for joining us. Based upon our conversation last night, I got a sense that you folks are counting on either Michigan or Pennsylvania to come through for you. Is that true? One of the two?
Yes. Yes, it is. We think if we're going to flip a blue state, that Michigan and Pennsylvania look ripe for the picking, Chris. That message of renegotiating bad trade deals and creating 25 million jobs over 10 years, protecting the steel workers, the coal miners that Hillary Clinton has been so critical of and promising to put out of business. We know those messages are resonant there. We like the fact that, particularly in the case of Michigan, the polls have been tightening over the last couple of weeks, something we saw internally and now you see it externally. And we're just trying to hang on to our core four and add to that with a flipped blue state. And also, you know, Hillary Clinton and her campaign are smart people. They were following our lead back into Michigan, back into Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Colorado of late, so they must see the same thing we do.
Let's talk about guns and religion. It seems to me that from the voting evidence I got this morning from one of my brothers out in the suburbs, a lot of older people coming in to vote for Trump on the grounds that whatever they think of Trump, they want to save the Supreme Court for their direction politically. Obviously concerned about choice issues, abortion rights, and perhaps gay rights and gay marriage. That was a strategy, it seemed to me, of your campaign in the last week or two to start pushing the gun issue, the Second Amendment issue in places like Pennsylvania, and also pushing the Supreme Court thing, the eight members of the court, which obviously will be decided by the 9th. Was that something you were counting on? You could stir those very culturally conservative Second Amendment people out to show up?
It's something that Donald Trump's been talking about his campaign all along. He's been, and including in that last debate, as you recall, there was a protracted conversation between Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump about the Second Amendment, the Heller decision to be more specific. I thought her answer to that was not particularly a shining point for her, and he made very clear that he supports the Heller decision, which found that we all have an individual right to bear arms. And in terms of the NRA, they endorsed Donald Trump a long time ago for president. They're a very powerful organization that gets out there and puts the juice and the messaging behind the candidates that they support. And then, of course, the Supreme Court, you know, Chris, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's an issue where even those who say, I'm torn between the two candidates or I'm reluctant to support the top of the ticket, it is the Supreme Court that has really crystallized and galvanized a lot of our supporters in that they realize the next president could be responsible for 3 or 4 nominations to the Supreme Court. In addition, you're talking about hundreds of appointments to the federal courts outside of the Supreme Court, which, as you and I know, are in charge of a lot of our personal liberties and pocketbook issues.
I got to ask you the big question. We just heard from the Clinton campaign that Secretary Clinton has 2 speeches for tonight, one for the good news, one for the bad news. Does your candidate follow that pattern, the ritual of having a second speech, if we will, without using the word, a second speech available should he need it?
Our candidate feels great about what he's put on the table and building this movement, and he's prepared to address the results as he sees them tonight.
Wow, that sounds positive. Thank you. Back to you guys. Thank you very much, Kellyanne.
Thank you.
Prepared to address the results as he sees them.
That sounds diplomatic. Yes. That sounds like a yes.
As he sees them.
As he sees them, right.
Well,
that
if it's
comes
not, his son said this morning that if it's a legit result, he'll accept it.
That's great. In 1960. You know, it's past 3 in the morning. NBC has called it. NBC has called it on the basis of thinking that California is going for Kennedy, which doesn't happen, actually, in the end. And ultimately, Nixon gets up in a California ballroom and gives a speech which is him talking about the results as he sees them. Yeah. And NBC anchors that night say, was that a concession? I don't know.
Well, he said if the trends continue, it was the best thing. And by the way, at that moment, Kennedy said, that's what I would do. I wouldn't be conceding at this point. But the next morning, Nixon didn't give a good concession speech. He flew across the country, never said a word. He had Herb Klein, his press guy, do it. But Kennedy had to go down to Key Biscayne, Florida, and sit down with Kennedy and have a couple of Cokes together so that Kennedy would actually get a concession of his opponent, and he gave it to him.
And delivering it by telegram to a press secretary is not the way to do it.
You have to do it in person. By the way, if Donald Trump wants to be on the newspapers tomorrow, it's an old concern. You got to put your face out there.
Yeah.
You have to show up and take the heat if it comes.
Well, I mean, depending on what happens tonight, how he reacts, we may be parsing his response.
I think
to figure out if it starts with a.
And people love it if the loser calls the winner and all that.
It's great stuff. It's a ritual.
That's the detail of American politics.
Love it.
Another break for us. Sorry we have to pursue these, just a few of them. And then we'll be joined by what became one of the voices during this election season. We are back. You're looking live at The View from 30 Rockefeller Plaza, looking downtown. In the distance, the jets lined up to land at LaGuardia and Kennedy Airport, but there in the foreground, the Empire State Building.
God, I love
red,
this night.
White, and blue for this night. Well done, Empire State Building. Now let's talk about Florida. Depending on your expert, a whole lot of people are walking around this building and other buildings like it, saying, when you hear Florida tonight, it's ball game. That may or may not be true, but we know Florida is going to be a huge component in this ball game. Kerry Sanders has been covering things up and down the I-4 corridor in Florida. Kerry?
Well, it is a critical part of the state because along the I-4 corridor, which extends from Tampa Bay over to Daytona Beach, it's the population along there, about 5.5 million people, voters, who will really ultimately determine which way the state goes, because to the north you have the conservative vote, and to the south you have the liberal vote. As I'm standing here, we've had lines on and off. It's not a line right now. About 15 minutes or so to go before this poll closes, and those who might be in line can still vote, and then they start tabulating the votes right inside here. In fact, in Florida, they're already tabulating those absentee ballots right here in Osceola County. They started about 2 hours ago. This is what it looks like. They actually fill in the little bubble, and they feed their votes right into a computer, and then that data is sent encrypted over the internet. If there's any question, they can always go back and recount the paper ballots. A little different than the Florida we saw in, well, many years going back to 2000, guys.
As we say, what could go wrong?
Although I can imagine the guy with the magnifying glass trying to see the little bubble, the way those guys with the pregnant Chads did back in 2000. One of the roles that one of our esteemed colleagues is playing here in our sort of news family tonight is that the great Chris Hayes is manning a news desk. He's sort of captaining a news desk, bringing together all the resources of MSNBC and NBC News in order to follow the stuff that we may not be anticipating in terms of news stories tonight, breaking news, serious news around the country, and Chris is going to come to us basically as needed as we learn new stuff. Chris, I understand you got a story tonight out of California.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. We're going to track a bunch of different breaking stories over the course of this election night. Right now, we've got a story of an active shooter situation in Azusa, California. That's about 30 minutes east of Los Angeles. Police responded to a call of a shooting there. When officers responded, as far as we know from the police department there, officers were pinned down, had to take cover, and were rescued. At least 2 people have been brought to the hospital. That shooter is still at large at this moment, and crucially, there are 2 polling locations near the spot in the residential neighborhood in Azusa where this shooting took place. 1 elementary school on lockdown. We do not have further details about the intent of this act of violence, its resolution, or the suspect, but obviously with people on high alert, obviously this being election day, this is a story that we will be keeping our eye on, along with a whole bunch of other stories throughout the night. We will bring you updates as we have them. Back to you, Rachel.
Chris, thank you. Let me just ask you one clarifying question. You said there's 2 polling places that are implicated in this simply by geography because they're nearby. We don't know that the shooting was connected to the voting process.
Exactly correct, and I want to be really specific about that. Obviously, that's the fear in any of this sort of situation, but there are polling places everywhere. There are 2 polling places that went into lockdown because of their proximity to where the shooting is. We are going to continue to report this out to figure out what is going on there. That is what we know at this moment. There is nothing indicating at this moment that the polling location organizations where targets are implicated in any way.
Okay, Chris Hayes, thank you very much. A, it's good to have that information on the air. B, I think I'm very glad that we've got Chris Hayes in that role tonight, who's basically able to break in at any moment and bring us breaking news in places that we can't predict it, and stories that will continue to pop up over the course of this, going to be a long night.
Related and unrelated to the national vote. Lawrence O'Donnell is standing by with a very special guest. Lawrence.
Thank you, Brian. I'm joined by Khizr Khan and his wife Ghazala Khan, the parents of Captain Humayun Khan. And Mr. and Mrs. Khan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. You did your first television discussion after the convention on our program, and we really appreciate you doing that and being back tonight. Mrs. Khan, you didn't speak at the convention that night because you told me you were too emotionally overwhelmed. If you could have spoken then, what would you have said, and what would you like to say to the country now?
Because our journey is, I think, started at that day. Because we wanted to bring people together. We wanted to bring everyone in the same direction that will take us further than taking us back. So I would have requested to pay attention about the people you love, go to them, hug each other, love them, and tell them how grateful you are, because God has given you opportunity in this country that you can survive. You can bring your children here. The children will make you go further in the life, far in the life, and they would have been better than we were in the other places. I love to be here in America because when I came here first time, I had such a nice neighbor, such a nice people. They greeted me with love. They greeted me with respect. They didn't ask me who I am. They didn't ask me if I'm a Muslim or any other religion. They didn't ask me from where I came. They just saw me as I am. So,
Mr. Khan, you told the story of your son's death, the way he was killed in Iraq, and in a situation where he was saving his fellow soldiers. You told that story at the convention, and then Donald Trump said things that were most of us perceived as being disrespectful to both of you. On Sunday, you went to New Hampshire with Hillary Clinton, and you addressed Donald Trump saying, "Would my son, Captain Humayun Khan, have a place in your America?" What do you think the answer to that is?
Knowing Donald Trump the way America knows him today, because of his bigotry, because of his statements, because of his announcements, his answer would be no. But I want him to know that this is not only his America, it belongs to all of us. And we have same dignity, same respect, same rights as any other American. That is the beauty, those are the values that make this country and make us move forward, make us think so passionately about the well-being of this nation, about the well-being of this country. That is our mission. We will continue to speak, regardless of election result tonight, we will continue to speak how to reconcile, how to remove the divisions that Donald Trump had sowed in the hearts and minds of this nation. We will continue to work in that direction. Whatever it takes, as grateful citizens of this country had showered us with love, respect, and dignity. We owe, as a citizen of this country, we owe this to this country, that we move that dialogue forward, interfaith, intercommunities, all communities coming together and reconciling and moving forward.
Mr. and Mrs. Khan, I know I speak for everyone here when I say I'm very sorry for your loss and the tragedy that has brought you into this discussion. But thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Brian, back to you.
Lawrence, our thanks to your guests, two people who never dreamed they'd be playing a role in this campaign. That's what Gold Star parents look like. Another break for us, our last, as we approach the top of the hour in our first poll closings. We are 4 minutes from the top of the hour, meaning our first poll closings. We've heard from our friends in the engine room. This thing's really going to start moving fast coming up at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Our closings include Georgia and Virginia, and right there off the top, whatever it is we are able to say about them, it's going to be interesting.
It is going to be interesting. We're going to see. I mean, we're about to get a closing also in Indiana, the home state of Mike Pence, Donald Trump's running mate, which has always been an interesting mix in terms of its red-blue appeal. One of the interesting things about Mike Pence is that he was on the precipice of running for re-election as his second term as Indiana governor. A lot of people thought his prospects for getting re-elected as governor were very shaky. It was seen as very interesting, obviously, for him being on the national ticket, but also very interesting for Indiana politics. We're going to see what happens in Indiana when those polls close in 3 minutes. Now, we're also looking ahead to South Carolina, which is a state where one of those southern states where Democrats, Gene's from South Carolina, Democrats have dreams of South Carolina. Well, and the Democrats in that state say that it's always closer here than you think it is.
Speak for all South Carolinians.
I think clearly moving in that direction. Now, this election, I'm not seeing it, but, 2 elections from now, we may be talking about the entire East Coast, basically, getting pretty blue. Getting pretty blue.
You're predicting South Carolina goes for the Democrat in 2.
Okay, maybe 3.
That was our first prediction of the night. I love it.
No, but it's really changing. South Carolina, it's not the South Carolina I grew up in, clearly, and the whole coastal region, which is where the population growth is.
Which is why Donald Trump spent a lot of his last stretch in that upper Midwest. I mean, I think this might be one of the demographic shifts.
You see what happened? You see what happened to Virginia, how Northern Virginia became part of the North.
Exactly.
And now Chapel Hill and the Research Triangle's become part of the North. And now Charleston's becoming part of the North.
Exactly.
It's so interesting.
Let's scoot over to Steve Kornacki at the Wall. Steve, what do you have?
Well, we got poll closings coming up here in just a few minutes. 2 key states to look at early. I just want to set up what we're going to be looking at when we get the returns in the exit polls. First of all, Virginia, we're going to get a test here of one of the key questions for the night. We're talking about these key groups. Black voters, huge turnout in 2008 and 2012 for Barack Obama, huge margins for Barack Obama. You see in Virginia, 4 years ago, 20% of the electorate in Virginia was black. Here's a question tonight. Is this number the same? Is it bigger? Is it smaller? No secret about it. The Trump campaign has been hoping that part of that Obama coalition, black voters, would be lower this time around. We're looking for that. We're also going to be looking again at that split among white voters, college, non-college. We'll be able to show you that. Georgia's closing too. And again, this is a state, the reason Democrats are so optimistic about Georgia long term, there is a rising Latino population. It's still pretty small in the state. This is actually 2008. There were no exit polls there 4 years ago. But the size of the black population in Georgia has been exploding over the last decade or two. So here's another question. 8 years ago with Barack Obama, the turnout of blacks were 30% of the electorate in Georgia. Is that number going to be up? Is that number going to be the same, or is it going to fall? We're looking for that in just a minute.